Hello. Welcome to Philosophy All Along. So, right now, I can't escape seeing all over the place analysis and discussion and complaining about Joe Biden pardoning his son, Hunter. This is a particularly large, one would argue, problematic pardon, right? This isn't just a matter of Joe Biden pardoning his son Hunter for the things he's been convicted of, but he's also pardoning him preemptively. So, for about a decade's worth of, if there's anything that he could be um, considered or to be convicted of, investigated for, he's already pardoned for those things on the federal level for 10 years in the past. So it's a preemptive pardon, which was something that Donald Trump had discussed doing during his own presidency. And at the time, Democrats were very critical. Like, that's a crazy idea. Why would you ever allow that? So there's a good chance that this is going to end up in litigation, that people are going to say, well, I think this has gone beyond the powers of the presidency. Um, is it understandable why Joe Biden would do this? Sure. Anyone who really loves somebody else, right? A parent who really loves their child would want to protect their kid, especially given the fact that Hunter has had significant struggles with significant addictions, and they have in so many ways harmed his life in significant ways. And the unquestionable fact that Hunter is paid more attention than, say, the average person who has committed crimes is is more likely to be driven towards that addiction again. In other words, he's been sober for a while, right? He's been clean for a while now, but if he continues to be investigated and go through all of those experiences, it increases the likelihood that he could go back to doing things that harm himself. So as a parent, you're like, well, how do I protect my kid? Well, by reducing those stresses. Now, the obvious kind of rebuff is well, is that fair? Is that just? Right. So we're going to spend less time here today talking about whether or not it was personally the right thing for Joe Biden to do. Instead, just ask the question: has he ruined his legacy? Has he, by doing this, shown himself to be disingenuous? Has he shown himself to be a liar? Because he made it very clear that he wasn't going to pardon his son, that pardoning his son wasn't on the table, but clearly it was on the table. It was something that Joe Biden had been thinking about. And has he now emboldened Donald Trump to do similar things, probably to even a larger degree? And so that Democrats, because Joe Biden has done this, have lost the moral high ground in regards to this idea that the presidency is a separate thing from things like the Department of Justice, that justice needs to be served regardless of the president and who they're connected to. And so now Republicans can kind of use that to bludgeon them, use that to criticize them, but also use it to say, well, here's some precedent. It's already been done. So Donald Trump wants to pardon these people, not just for their current crimes, but into the future. He wants to pardon himself. He wants to pardon himself into the future. All of these things are now things that seem to have precedent. So, oh my goodness, how much damage has Joe Biden done? Well, I think we need to be really realistic about this. And what I mean is that if we're being honest with ourselves, Joe Biden's concern that his son would be under investigation for purely political reasons is not an illegitimate concern. Um, is he someone who has committed crimes, pled guilty to those crimes? 100%. We also know for facts that it was the intention of Donald Trump and the people that he's been tapping into these various positions of power in law enforcement. He's already made it clear that they're going to do as much investigation of the Bidens as they can. Now, is that something that they just said and then weren't really going to do, kind of like with Hillary Clinton? Maybe. But the difference is that this time Donald Trump ran saying, this is about vengeance. Now, that's not, for those of you who are more conservative, going, well, that's, no, that's what he said. He said it, right? He said he was going to do that. And you have to be honest with yourself, right? Speaking to the MAGA crowd, you like that. Don't pretend that you don't, right? That this is just about policy. Like, for people who just kind of voted for him in general, like, oh, I don't know who I'm going to vote for. Well, I like that economy. Okay, fine. Then they're not maybe there for the vengeance. But if you're MAGA, if you're hardcore conservative MAGA, you love it. Don't pretend that you don't. right? You like that he talks about who he's going to get, and you like the anger that and you would be disingenuous if you were to say, I really like that Donald Trump just speaks his mind and says what he wants to say. I feel like he's not fake, he's just real, he's just, upfront with his thoughts and feelings, and then say, well, but I don't think he's really honest about who he's going to get and how he's going to get them, and I don't really agree with that. No, it's a pleasurable experience to have someone talking crap about the people you don't like and the people you want to see taken down, right? And Donald Trump has talked a lot about how he's going to be taking people down, and clearly the cabinet picks that he's choosing are people who have every intention of kind of going in and gutting and demolishing various institutions like the FBI, right? The Department of Justice and things like that. So I think if I was Joe Biden, I would be looking at that and going, this isn't just going to be a matter of like, okay, my son serves some time. This is going to be a matter of my son serves some time, and he will be the object of investigation by Congress. He will be object of investigation by the FBI. He will be under constant investigation. And even if there are or are not things, it becomes irrelevant that he will be used to harm me as much as possible. That the goal really becomes, how can we hurt the Biden brand? And there's very good reason for um, Donald Trump to do so. Donald Trump notoriously likes to go after the people who came before him, who happen to be liked, and try and kind of undermine what they did, even if that thing is liked or useful or good. And what do I mean by that? A great example was the Affordable Care Act, right? I.e., Obamacare. That he really, really wanted to repeal it, even as it was becoming kind of increasingly more kind of ingrained in our society and something that people were using. It was like, well, I'm going to come up with something better. Why not come up with something better, then repeal it, right? Like, give us the plan first, right? But he just wanted it out there. And he went through kind of policy by policy. If it was something that had Barack Obama's hands on it, Donald Trump was like, I'm going to get rid of that thing. So there's already this tendency, we know, for Trump to go, that was what the predecessor did, and that's something that they were proud of. Let me go and get that thing. I want to show that I can do better. I'm gonna build it bigger, and I'm gonna put my name on it, and people aren't gonna love that person so much. So I think that Biden is probably looking at this going, and he really, really, really wants to do my brand as a Biden as much harm as possible. And he's going to use my son to do it. And it doesn't matter how much harm it does to my son. It doesn't matter if my son relapses, if my son's life is utterly destroyed by this, guilty or not. He's going to gleefully go about destroying him in the hopes that it will destroy me. And what good reason does he have for it? Simply this. When Joe Biden stepped out of the presidential race, it became incredibly important for Republicans and for people who sympathize with the MAGA ideology to cast that as something that was not Biden's choice, not done by his own will, that it was something he was forced to do. And why? Because stepping down for the opportunity for power, stepping down from the opportunity for power was an anti-Trump move. I mean that in the way that someone might be like the anti-Christ, right? This is an anti-Trump thing. That is not something that Trump would ever do. Donald Trump, and again, even if you're someone who loves him, you cannot think of an instance in where that man was like, you know what, that's some power, I don't want it, never mind. It is unusual for any president. Presidents have notoriously throughout the history of the United States sought power and every opportunity to gain more power. And so you've seen the power of the executive branch expand significantly over the course of the history of the United States. So Joe Biden saying, you know what, I don't think that I have a chance to win this election. What I've been told by my closest advisors is that I'm hurting the chances of Democrats to be able to win the election and stopping Donald Trump, despite the fact that I don't want to. And it's pretty clear that I don't want to. I think I actually can win this. I'm going to go ahead and step down. That was a big deal. Really, the only actual equivalent that I could think of is George Washington before there was precedent set saying, you know what, 8 years is enough. I'm not going to run again. And I know that connection has been made before, but the fact that George Washington chose not to continue controlling the army after defeating the most powerful military force in the world at the time, Great Britain. The fact that he let go of that and just became a citizen again is often under discussed. So it's not just a matter of George Washington didn't keep running for the presidency. He had this support. His military loved him and would have happily, right, just done away with all of these civilians' ideas about let's make some sort of democracy. There weren't really much in the way of functioning democracies in the world at all at the time. It's certainly not in Europe, not where the United States was paying attention. It was seen as it would be a failed experiment. His military leaders really thought that it wasn't going to work and that George Washington should be in charge. And how do I know that? Because they tried to stage a coup, right? The United States military leaders got together and tried to stage a coup, and George Washington found out about it, went in to where they were having like their secret meeting and said, anyone who is a part of this is no friend of mine. And so the coup fell apart. And the citizenry politicians of the United States were able to put our government together because George Washington was unwilling to maintain power just for himself. And that kind of information got back to King George III, who had every reason to dislike Washington. And he's like, well, if that's true, he's the greatest of men. We have to remember that the President of the United States has access to the most power of anyone in the world. And we often go, oh, well, there's checks and balances. Those checks and balances only exist as long as the president decides to continue to acknowledge them, right? As long as the executive branch chooses not to go, you know what? No, I have the military, Congress doesn't. What are you going to do? What's the Supreme Court going to do? Okay, yeah, nothing. Okay, right. Abraham Lincoln was looking at dismissing the Supreme Court at one point in time, right? What's to stop him from doing so? So all I mean to say is that it is actually no small thing. Like, think about like quarterbacks who refuse to retire. Right, you're like, okay, and then they just go on to another team even after their team lets them go, and they just kind of like drag on forever. The presidency is not unlike that, except multiply it by a million times in terms of power. So people actually letting go of that power is not an insignificant thing. The peaceful transfer of power is probably one of the most important things in the United States, if not the most important. And so Joe Biden saying, you know what, I think I don't have a chance for this, at least that's what I'm being told, I'm going to give the opportunity to someone else, is a really big deal. It's not something that Donald Trump would do. And so it really hurts Trump's brand, and it gives the Democrats a lot of moral high ground. Now, the Democrats already basically yield that high ground instead of like lauding him and holding him up as someone who was willing to do that. Democrats started fighting amongst themselves and saying, well, this is something that he was probably pushed out. It was impossible to push him out. Nancy Pelosi did not go in there and say, okay, well, I'm refusing to support you if you continue to do this. And then he had to leave. It wouldn't have worked like that. He already had the delegates that he needed. He was already the nominee. There was nothing anybody could do. And at the end of the day, any threats that Nancy Pelosi would have made, you might be like, well, she could have done X, Y, Z. Yeah, and then done even more harm to all of the other Democrats who were running. So at the end of the day, she's going to talk a lot, but she's not going to actually do it, because if she does, if she helps Joe Biden lose, she would have helped him lose to Donald Trump, right? That makes no sense. So the fact of the matter is he had the nomination as long as he wanted to have the nomination. He stepped down because he chose to. Yes, there was pressure, but that pressure was not pressure that could force him to do so. It was like emotional pressure. He had to make a decision. He made the decision that he thought was in the best interest of the country. That's the simple answer, right? That interpretation of that action is completely antithetical to what Donald Trump has created in terms of you never give up, you never say that you've lost, you never admit a flaw, you never admit that you've done wrong. It's always about winning, no matter what, no matter the cost. You got to do that. And so Donald Trump needs to destroy that. He needs that the populace of the United States to believe in the idea that no one is actually a good person. It's important because think about how many people are like, well, I don't always agree with the way Donald Trump has done things in his moral personal life, but I think he's a great guy for X, Y, and Z reasons in terms of the economy. I think he's a great president for this in terms of policy. So I'm going to overlook those moral flaws. So it's incredibly important that Donald Trump not just be someone that we go, okay, well, I'm going to kind of give you a pass on this. Really, at the end of the day, his goal is to make us think that nobody could really ever be that good. So we might as well actually view him as kind of, well, what do you do with your human flaws? You hold them up, right? You say, I'm awesome. You refuse to admit any flaw. you say, the things that you're calling flaws are really awesome things about me. Women love me. It's not that I grab or assault them, it's that I'm just that awesome, right? So admit nothing. Because then he has the thing that he wants the most in the world, which is adoration of people, like people holding him up, people saying he's great and that he's wonderful. And as long as Joe Biden exists as a brand that's counter to that, it's going to annoy him. It's just going to be kind of a needle in his side. So I think the long and short of it is he was going to do everything that he could to undermine that family and destroy that family, specifically to hurt Joe Biden and to try and tarnish that his tarnish Joe Biden and his brand. What's interesting, I think, about it is he really wouldn't have needed to, because at the end of the day, the American populace had already ignored, given up, forgotten the fact that Joe Biden had stepped out of the race. It didn't matter to us. Why? Because Kamala Harris didn't win. We'd be having a very different conversation where people would be saying the sacrifice that Joe Biden made was that, he would be lauded and held up in his legacy. That's all gone, because here in the United States, we really don't care if what someone does is good if they lose. And we don't care that much if what someone does is bad if they win. That just seems to be an unfortunate fact about the way that we kind of view the world as a culture. I immediately think about like Bill Belichick, right? As long as the Patriots were winning, as long as they're winning, it doesn't really matter if the things that he's doing were kind of questionably on the line of it. It's true of like quarterbacks and sports teams. Like, well, if they're doing something a little bit on the line in terms of maybe cheating in the games, but did they win? And did they win in awesome ways? That's what we seem to be really kind of most motivated by. One thing that has become incredibly clear is that people aren't all that willing to vote against someone um, just because they have been convicted of crimes, or because they seem to be very guilty, or the things that they say are really nasty and filled with like rage and hate. Really kind of like, yeah, but who isn't? Right? So at the end of the day, there really isn't any need for them to go after Joe Biden for this kind of branding issue, because the American population already is like, well, he didn't win, he's a loser, let's back the winner. The president of the United States, regardless of who the president of the United States is when you take a poll, when they ask like who is the person who is the most well respected in the world, like who do you respect, who do you admire the most, who do you want to be the most like, it's always the president of the United States. So it was true when it was Barack Obama, right? It was true when it's Donald Trump. It doesn't. These are two radically different human beings. What people admire is the position, not the person. And whoever the person is, that's the person they want to be like, because it means that they get to have the position. Okay, so the fact of the matter is that his legacy, Biden's legacy, is in fact in some way tarnished by his action. But the fact of the matter is it didn't really matter, right? Him pardoning his son is like, you could be like, well, we already viewed him as a loser. I don't mean you necessarily did or I did. I mean socially, it was like, okay, well, the guy lost. One-term presidents generally get shoved into the kind of dustbin of history. They're very rarely particularly well regarded, or people that our history books really make note of. And the fact of the matter is I think Joe Biden, looking at this, already knew that they're going to do everything that they can to rewrite his presidency, right? Donald Trump is going to have so much power. He's going to have more power than any president in the history of the presidency has ever had, by virtue of the most recent Supreme Court decisions that have basically given him unlimited immunity, and by virtue of having appointed people who are complete and utter loyalists to him. There's nothing to hold the man back, right? He's going to gut out the Pentagon. Every general who seems disinclined to just do what he says is going to be gone, right? I can't imagine a world in which that doesn't happen, because he said so. He said he's going to do it, and he's already begun putting people in charge of the Pentagon who happen to agree with that. So he's going to have so much power that they're going to be able to write and present history however they so choose. So I think Joe Biden, looking at that and going, okay, how do I insulate and protect my family, particularly the most vulnerable member of my family, from that? Did it place Trump in a position where he has even greater opportunity to do that? Like, did he set a precedent, and so now Trump is even less kind of has fewer guardrails? I don't think that makes any sense, to be frank. will Republicans use it as an excuse, like lower level Republicans, like senators? Well, Joe Biden did it, sure, but Trump was going to do it anyways. Like it's not as if like, oh well, now that Joe Biden's used the pardon in that way, I feel more comfortable in doing so. If anything, there is a laughable way in which it might make it less likely, right? Because Trump tends to be so kind of conflict oriented and like, look at that person and how awful they are, and look at how much better I am than them. Now that Joe Biden has done this, there's always a chance that he might be like, well, I want to do something like that, right? So I think that it really doesn't make an actual practical difference. It might make a difference in the perception of the populace. Well, you have these pundits and you have these talking heads who are like, well, Joe Biden did it, so it's okay. So the populace might be like, well, didn't Biden start it? Sure, I guess that's possibly the case. But the fact that Donald Trump was going to go in and pardon whoever he wants, that he was going to push the federal pardon as far as he could, that he was going to do everything he could to reconstruct the Department of Justice, right, and all of these departments, all of these agencies into his own image to serve him. The fact that he was going to do that was already baked into the cake. And we know this, again, speaking to conservative viewers, because he said so, right? And because the actions that he's taking right now say so. And you have to be honest with yourself, you probably like that on some level. Well, he's going to go in and he's going to turn it up on its head. And conservatives are way more likely to enjoy and feel comfortable with a certain level of one really powerful person who's in charge. That's how you get things done. You got to have a boss and you got to have the worker bees, right? That tends to be more of a conservative mindset. Where liberals are more likely to complain about the person, to criticize the person who's in charge, so on and so forth. So Trump was already going to do that. So do I think that this particular action has just utterly destroyed Joe Biden's legacy? No, I think it was already gone for us. And I think, unfortunately, I think that we would be better as a people, regardless of who was president, if we had as much respect for people who give things up as we do for people who have things. In other words, if we were the kind of people who were like, it matters less whether or not you win the Super Bowl, but matters more how you win the Super Bowl, I think that speaks to us and our quality of character. Um, it reminds me of just one final thought here. I remember uh, hanging out with a friend of mine, and their father was talking about his youngest daughter, right? And he was talking about how his daughter had been in this race, and it was it was a practice, right? For She was like a competitive runner in school, and her friend was injured, like fell, and so instead of going to continue trying to like win this practice, she helped her friend get to the end of it. And he said, well, that's great, but I made sure to tell my daughter, you don't do that in the real thing, right? You don't do that in the actual race. And to me, that's really speaks to who we are. And that person happened to, by the way, be very liberal minded, right? That here in the United States, what we really are most concerned about is who wins and not how you win. And so Biden is making that choice, I think, knowing already that things are looking very bad for his family, that they're going to come after them. And he already knows that his legacy is already kind of relegated to the losers of history in the United States anyways, and the people who are going to have the power to write the history and determine what that legacy is going to be are going to do everything that they can to undo everything he's done. So what might as well he do in that point? Protect his family. That being said, I do think that it does demonstrate something really kind of tragic for us, which is the fact that people who do selfish things want to see other people do selfish things. And they tend to work pretty hard on kind of turning us into them, saying, see, you're just as bad as I am. And there is, I think, at the end of the day, kind of the moral worry that what's happening in United States politics is something along those lines of let me show you how much you're actually like me, and that Donald Trump has done a very good job of kind of lifting people in into the space of going, well, yeah, they're look at, yeah, you investigate into them and you find out that they did all these, oh yeah, so she shot her dog, she shot her puppy, who cares, right? We all have bad things, right? So why try to be a better person? And that concerns me a lot when you have an entire society that's kind of like, but if I try to be a better person, I'll have less stuff that I want. And what do you want me to give to charity or something? Come on. Like, so I think that my biggest worry out of all of this is that Donald Trump has made it so clear that he would have gone after Joe Biden's family, is that he made Biden a little bit more like him. And in that regard, we're all a little bit worse off. All right, thank you so much. If you enjoyed this, please do like, please do subscribe. If you didn't, put it in a comment. Let me know your thoughts. I will be happy to politely address them. So, oh, and tell some friends if you enjoyed it. Tell them to follow. All right, thanks so much. Have a wonderful day.